thank you for coming, and thank you all the purveyors who grew and produced the food, especially Botany Bay. It's delightful to come and eat chicken like ours this far away across the country. That's really cool. So, well done. Everybody can hear okay? I'll try not to turn my back to you guys, but they said to kind of point out here, so no offense here. So what I did over in there was what I call, in this case, part one. So now we're going to go a little bit farther. This will be part two. And remember, if you'll recall over there, I kind of concluded by saying that creation is an object lesson of spiritual truth. So let's think. Let's think about what kind of spiritual truth we can learn from creation. So, one is that the spiritual truth of abundance. You know, we live in a time when the greater part of society is all about scarcity. We're overpopulated, we're running out of this, running out of that. But a spiritual living life is all about abundance. And it's important to realize that there was way more food grown in North America 500 years ago than is grown here today. Did you know that? Now, it wasn't all eaten by people. We had 200 million bison. We had about 200 million beavers who ate more vegetables than all the humans in North America today. Beavers are herbivores. Now, they weren't eating potatoes, but they were eating plants and bark and whatever. We had birds so plentiful. John Audubon wrote in his diary in about 1820, he said, I sat under a tree and it was 3 days that the passenger pigeons flying over blocked out the sun. Anybody seen a flock of birds block out the sun for 3 days? I haven't seen it for a day. That's right. That's right. And that's before Tyson. Before John Deere. Before hybrid seeds. So the idea that nature's principles are actually more abundant than what we have contrived is quite humbling, actually. And we realize then the spiritual principle that in its raw state, the Christian life is actually more abundant than all the things that are supposed to bring us more abundance. Like being a Swiftie, or, you know, a Kim Kardashian aficionado, or all the things that are supposed to, you know, wine, women, and song, right? All the things that are supposed to bring abundance, and actually it's more abundant, the real thing. How about another one? Order. Order. This is a powerful one because order, you know, Genesis 1:2 starts out with chaos, right? God's a God of order. And those of us in the faith community, we're struck by the lack of order, aren't we, in our society now? I mean, you know, you can choose your sex, you can choose whether you want a baby or not, or what you're going to do with the baby inside of you. There are all sorts of issues regarding order. And so one of the orders is given to us in Genesis 1:12, where it said, if you remember that verse, it says, God made the seed after its own kind, to bear fruit after its own kind. Remember that? What about genetically modified organisms? GMOs. They don't produce seed after their own kind. In fact, most of them are genetically engineered to not produce seed, so you have to go back to the patent owner. So, as believers in the faith community, when we make fun of the environmentalists that don't want GMOs, because after all, we've embraced science and Dominion and Monsanto, okay? How are we supposed to present that there are ordered boundaries in the natural world that God wants us to adhere to when we see no problem crossing a tomato with a cow with a salmon? I got news for you, folks. If the sexual plumbing doesn't match up, it ain't right. Okay? And so what we want is for somebody to be able to leave our table, leave our farm, and understand, wow, that was ordered. You know, a big one was back 40 years ago, 50 years ago, when the worldwide scientific community took farmers like me to free steak dinners to teach us a new revolutionary way to feed cows. We grind up dead cows and we feed them back to cows. And when I didn't go along with it, I was labeled a Luddite, a Neanderthal, a barbarian, a science hater, anti-progress. I mean, you know, there's a lot of things you can, and that's what I was called. But when they came up with this cockamamie idea, I looked around the planet, I said, where does an herbivore eat carrion? And I couldn't find it. That was enough. You know, it was enough for me to appreciate maybe there's an order here. I didn't know at the time that 30 years later there would be bovine spongiform encephalopathy, also known as mad cow. Yeah. Now, look, folks, if you learn how to say bovine spongiform encephalopathy, you sound way more educated and intellectual. Nobody's going to debate you if you. So look in the mirror and learn to say bovine spongiform encephalopathy. You'll win every debate, just hands down. It's kind of like saying the names in the Old Testament. You don't have to say them right, just say them fast, and everybody will think you're really smart. But no, I mean, we looked around and realized that feeding dead cows to cows violated God's order. That's not an order. We didn't know there would be mad cow 30 years later, but it caught up. A lot of times, the results of disorder don't happen overnight. It's a bit of a slinky. And my goodness, nature, God built a lot of forgiveness into nature. We can abuse it and abuse it and abuse it, and it's incredibly resilient. But eventually, it'll catch up. And so there is an order. Birds follow herbivores. So on our farm, we follow the cow herd. We move the cows every day. And we follow them with the eggmobile, just chickens. And chickens follow the herbivores. They scratch through the cow pies, eat out the fly larvae, scatter the cow pies into the ground to increase the fertility. And this is order. This is pattern. So you start seeing this pattern, this order. And so this is, as we bring up our children, when they live in a world with an object lesson of order, then it's easy to talk about no man can come to the Father but by me. That's order. You can't climb up another gate. That's what the hireling does. That's disorder. See? And so you have these wonderful, visceral object lessons that you can use to hang kind of mystical, esoteric, spiritual truth on this physical framework. How about another one? All power, and John mentioned this in his, I won't belabor this one as much. All power comes from the Son, S-U-N, in nature. Isn't it wonderful that all power in the Christian life, in the spiritual realm, comes from the S-O-N, Son? And so ultimately we are, in the physical realm, we are solar driven. We are S-U-N driven, and we want farms that are solar driven. And so on our farm, we don't use chemical fertilizer, we use compost. And compost is fundamentally solar driven because it's plant material that decomposes and it drives it drives the system. You know, through photosynthesis, the planet is on a weight gain program. Every day the planet's on a weight gain program. And they say matter isn't destroyed, but it is created. It's created every day by those whatever trillion gigahunt. I can't even tell John's about the energy that comes from the sun. Okay, and so our power is brought to us by the S-O-N spiritually. The object lesson is the Son drives us, not something else. How about another one? The most real thing in the world is invisible. The most real thing in the world is invisible. Again, John touched on this a little bit. A handful of healthy soil, I'll mention one he didn't mention. A handful of healthy soil has generally around 9 billion, with a B, not million, billion beings in it. No, they're really small, okay? They're really small, but think about that. One handful, 9 billion beings, and we have only cataloged 10% of them. 90% of them are unnamed and unknown as to function. That's how little we know about what the scientist Elaine Ingham calls the soil food web. This is a magnificent community. And I would ask anybody, does anybody think that the health of that community is less important than whether Wall Street went up or down today? The fact is that every one of us is completely dependent. All of our life is completely dependent on something we don't see. And so the reality is the invisible, the unseen, actually controls, dominates, affects us more than what we see. That's a profound spiritual truth. We have a real hard time, don't we? I do, I'll speak to for myself, thinking about the invisible world around me. There are demons, there's a devil, there are angels, there's spiritual warfare going on in high places, right? Yeah, we read all about that, but we almost have to, hit ourselves with a 2x4 to appreciate, wow, there is more reality in what I don't see than what I do see. But we don't even think about it. I mean, who gets up in the morning and takes a shower heading to work and, I wonder how the actinomycetes are doing today, and the mycelium, and the fungi. Who goes to the bank for a business loan, and the banker says, wow, this is a great business plan. In fact, I think you're going to be a millionaire. In fact, I'd like to be your partner, but I've got one question. before I give you this $1 million loan for your business, what's this going to do to the mycelium in our community? Nobody asks that. And yet, don't we all agree that actually is a more important question than whether or not we have a business? So this is the invisible, more important. How about another one? The principle of, in order for life, there must be death. Oh, this is a powerful one. This is one that I get all the time from the fake meat, lab meat people. Oh, we can eat without killing anything. Oh, wouldn't that be wonderful if we could eat without killing anything? Folks, the great fallacy of chemical fertilizer, when Justus von Liebig in 1837, I'll give you a little history lesson. 1837, very interesting year. So everybody was concerned about running out of food. 1837. It only took 20 years for steamboats to deplete centuries and centuries of pelican, cormorant, and booby bird guano off the coast of Peru. That manure, guano manure, was 100 feet thick. When they discovered it, in only 20 years, Chinese coolies, many of whom were so frustrated at being forced into hand dig this guano, they'd flung themselves off and drowned in the ocean. That's just a little sidelight. But it only took 20 years to transport all of that millennium accumulated guano to England and the US for fertilizer, and it was gone. And so in 1837, Justus von Liebig is trying to figure out, how do we solve the soil fertility problem? We're all gonna die. We're not gonna have enough food. Bill Gates isn't the first one that says we need to kill half the people. And so, what are we gonna do? And so he used his vacuum tubes and figured out that all of life was simply a rearrangement of nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus. All of life. Nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus. That was the first time in human history that the world embraced a non-spiritual aspect to life. And it completely mechanized life. It made life inanimate protoplasm at its foundation, rather than something that was innately, that had a spark of life, a mystery of life, okay? That's also the same year a famous British anthropologist set sail from Great Britain on a ship named the Beagle. His name was Charles Darwin. And so he, of course, presented to us the idea that God didn't have anything to do with creation. So he took God out of the creative process. It's also the year that a guy down 10 miles from our house in the Shenandoah Valley invented the reaper. His name was Cyrus McCormick. You've heard of McCormick Deering, McCormick, 1837. That's the official start of the Industrial Revolution, because that eliminated the scythe for harvesting grain. What he invented was the oscillating knife to be able to cut things. And essentially today's oscillating hay mowers and little mowers are essentially exactly the same as what he developed in 1837. So I want you to think about it. 1837 was a pretty interesting year globally. Number one, all of life was reduced to mechanics. God had nothing to do with creation. And we entered the industrial age of mechanization. The world was ripe for that. And so the fallacy of NPK fertilization, the fallacy was not an insincere heart trying to solve a problem. The fallacy was not experimenting for a solution. The fallacy was in thinking that you could have life without death. Because all life comes from the decomposition or the digestion of something that dies. I mean, the best example is a compost pile, right? For some reason, a bag of 10-10-10 chemical fertilizer apparently is more sexy than a compost pile. I would suggest there's a lot more sex going on in a compost pile than a bag of 10-10-10 chemical fertilizer. I might be kicked out of this church tomorrow. I don't know. But this life without death permeates the vegan movement, the lab meat movement, the chemical fertilizer movement. It is a philosophical underpinning of all of this thought that there can actually be life without death. The big difference between mechanics and biology is that biology can forgive. If you got here tonight and your front wheel bearing in your car starts going thump, 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 you stop that car and you can get out and you can apologize. I'm sorry I didn't take care of you. You need some grease? You need to rest. Oh, we'll sit here a little while. We'll rest. What's going to happen with that wheel bearing when you get back in the car? Thump, thump, thump. But aren't we thankful that we can say an unfit word to our spouse, ask forgiveness, and the wheel bearing is okay? That we can skin our hand and put some salve on it and wait a week and new skin. Only biological things can forgive, can heal. Mechanical things don't heal, and they don't forgive. As I got older and started using more and more equipment, especially the chainsaw, my dad used to always say, remember, machines don't forgive. You can go out there and spraddle yourself on your favorite Tesla convertible. I love you. It couldn't care less. But when you do that to your spouse, they kind of like it. This is a fundamental principle. I'm belaboring it because it is so foundational to ecology. And yet we have an entire culture that is investing billions of dollars and has been for a long time on a notion, an idea that we can have life without death. And of course, we know the object lesson of that is there can be no spiritual life without the death of Christ. And his death purchased life for us all. And when I talk to elementary kids, I explain to them, if you really want to live, you die to self. So you know what? When mom asks you to feed the dog, even though you're on your video game, you jump up and you feed the dog. Why? Because denying yourself, dying to self, is how you really live. And we see, and so we see it in the object lesson of dying for life. Another one, diversity. Oh boy, that's a hot button today. Diversity. But the fact is that diversity is a huge, huge natural pattern, natural principle. You know, if you want to have true abundant production, you don't do a monoculture. You don't do a factory farm. You have a lot of relational complexity. Go out to any natural place, Goodness, go to a watering hole in Africa. See what comes to the watering hole in Africa. Everything, all sorts of things, okay? And they're all filling little niches, little niches. Monocultures actually, create all sorts of ecological problems, from a lack of pollinators to a lack of wildlife. And one of the things we've done on our farm is we have actually, built forestal corridors into the open land and made ponds so that the more edge effect we have, most things actually like two different environments. Very few things live in only water, land, or forest. They want two of those, like wild turkeys. Turkeys, they go to the woods for shelter, but there aren't enough bugs in the woods to feed their little poults that need 28% protein, so they got to live along the edge so their poults can come out in the field where all the grasshoppers and crickets are, high protein, and then they can scurry back into the woods for shelter. And so we've actually made sure that we have trees within 200 yards of all of our open land so birds can go shelter and come out and eat bugs and go back and shelter and come out and eat bugs. This is the way, this diversity, and of course we see this in the church, don't we? Not all are preachers, not all have the gift of hospitality. We've got different gifts, different things. We know that a church where everybody had the same gift and everybody believed exactly the same way would be a kind of sterile place. Just like if all couples had the same characteristics and personality traits. If cleanies only married cleanies. And spenders only married spenders. And starters only married starters. And extroverts only married extroverts. That would not be healthy, would it? So diversity is a big deal. But in our industrial agriculture systems, diversity is anathema. In fact, in the poultry industry, they don't want any wildlife. They're trying to figure out how to eliminate all wildlife and all birds within, half a mile of every factory house. Listen, when a system views wildlife as a liability, there's something wrong with that system. And so what we've got is a very singular idea. So let me put some real brass tacks on this idea of object lesson. So we often have what I call church speak. Church speak, like in the Bible, for example, the word baptism was not a spiritual word. It simply meant to be overwhelmed by. And it's used in all sorts of Greek literature to describe a ship where they're in a storm and the water's crashing over the decks. And it says the ship was baptizos. It was baptized, so it's in regular, literature, Iliad and the Odyssey, that sort of thing. There's nothing special about it. I mean, there was nothing. It was a word that was used in common parlance, okay? One of the words today that we don't use very much, that you don't hear out on the street, is the word glory. Now, we use it in the church as part of our spiritual lingo, but you don't hear it out on the street very much. Nobody says glory. But the Bible doesn't relegate it to spirit speak. It talks about the glory of children. It talks about the glory of young men, the glory of Moab, the glory of Kedar, the glory of Lebanon, the glory of the Gentiles, the glory of Ephraim, the glory of women, the glory of celestial, the glory of terrestrial, the glory of the sun, imagine that, the glory of the moon, the glory of man, the glory of kings. My goodness, it's not glory. It's not relegated to church. It's used regularly. So, imagine this. Sunday dinner, the kids are gathered around, and you're going to have pork chops. And the kids are there, and you say, remember when we went out to Farmer John's last week and we saw those pigs? Yeah, those pigs, yeah. Remember what they were doing? Oh, yeah, they were running around. They were rooting in the ground. They were, chewing on persimmons and, getting some grass, and they were snuggling each other, and they were, well, kids, you know what that was? What you saw there was the glory of pigs. Glory is the distinctiveness of something, the thing that makes something special that nothing else has, okay? That's why in the Bible, it's got glory of all these different things. It's talking about the thing that makes them special. So glory is the distinctiveness of something. And so the kids are there at Sunday dinner, having your pork chops. Say, yeah, well, we saw those pigs. They were really expressing their distinctiveness. They were really expressing their pigness of pigs. And we saw the glory of the pigs. Yeah, kids, that's why we're eating these pork chops today, because we believe in honoring and respecting the glory of things, the distinctiveness of things. We want to affirm that distinctiveness of things. And you know why? Because we want to honor the glory of God. Now, kids, we've just established what are the distinctives, what's the glory of a pig. Let's talk about what's special about God. What's distinctive about him that nobody else has? Okay? Well, let's see. He's sovereign. He's omniscient. He's omnipresent. He's holy. And you can go down these attributes that all of us learn in our catechism. But you see what I've just done? I've used this very visceral object lesson of why we went to Farmer John's to see pigs expressing their glory to hang then a spiritual framework of understanding. So now when we talk about the glory of God, it's not just some academic, esoteric, mystical word. It's actually, we saw the glory of pigs, and now we're going to talk about what's distinctive about God. Isn't that cool? And I don't think that it's I don't think it's a bad thing to actually talk about spiritual matters that way. That's an exciting way to talk about spiritual matters. But think about, then you can go on, well, okay, so what does our culture think about pigs? I'm focusing on pigs because they're so fun. Well, our culture now, we're using, our land-grant universities are now doing research on how to extract the porcine stress DNA from their genetic makeup so that we can abuse them more, and at least they won't be stressed about it. Now, does that sound like a society you'd like to, does that sound like a pork chop that we ought to eat? No. We confine them in structures. We chop off their tail so it's tender so that they won't cannibalize each other. I mean, we completely assault a pig in our mentality, in our thinking, and then we wonder why, when we've done that much violence to something, why we have a new lexicon that's violent against us. Those of you who are as old as I am can remember when we were kids and you had a birthday party for 3-year-olds. The moms didn't spend 2 days on the phone now texting, before the party asking the other moms, well, what's your kid allergic to? There was no such phrase as food allergy. You wanted a party, everybody came, brought their stuff, and you ate. We didn't talk about salmonella, E. coli, Campylobacter, listeria. What is all this? Folks, it is nature on its knees begging us, enough! When are you going to quit disrespecting us? When are you going to quit assaulting us? And when are you going to appreciate the glory of the pig, the glory of the tomato, the specialness of life? When are you going to understand it? And so there is absolutely a link and an object lesson. Another one, forgiveness. Forgiveness. 1 John 1:9, we come to him, he's faithful and just to forgive us of all our sins. Ecologists, they don't use the word forgiveness. That's another word that you don't hear out there very much, forgiveness. They use the word resilience. Resilience is the ecologist's equivalent of forgiveness. In other words, it's what allows you to take in, to take in shocks. And it helps you to understand what sin is and be able to take the stresses of life to build in forgiveness. Because life isn't always fun. There are blizzards and droughts and hurricanes and all sorts of things. And the neat thing is that forgiveness can be extended to anybody. There's a whosoever will component. So let's think about, let's just pick on lab-grown meat again. What could possibly be less whosoever will from a food standpoint than all of our food coming from a billion-dollar laboratory? I mean, the beauty of God's provision is as long as it rains and the sun shines and there's grass, we can grow meat, we can grow milk, we can grow our food. But if our food only comes through billion-dollar stainless steel laboratories, that's not a very whosoever will situation. It's not easy to get into if you wanted to grow fake meat, but it also doesn't guarantee you a place at the table if somebody doesn't want to give you a place at the table because they own the funnel. Are you with me? So there are a lot of issues here. An object lesson that I like on this is, so imagine you've got a youth group and you want to talk about sin and forgiveness and how to deal with it. Imagine how many youth groups in the country go for a weekend to a theme park. I don't think a theme park is sin, but just imagine if instead of that, you got all the teenagers a hoe and a mattock. Said, we're going to go out and we're going to chop thistles at Farmer Harry's place, and or maybe attack blackberries. We're in Washington, right? All right, blackberries, and we have multiflora rose. You have multiflora rose here? You don't have multiflora rose. Oh, that's our worst. What? Bindweed? Bindweed. Okay. Well, name your whatever your scourge is. Okay, that's fine. We're going to go out and we're going to attack these things. And they're here, especially the thistles and the brambles. They're here because of the fall. That's when they came, right? And so we're going to go out and these young people they get around here and they look at this old thistle and they got to kind of size it up. Where am I gonna chop it and attack it? We're not gonna spray it with herbicides. We're gonna engage with it. And we're gonna spend the afternoon helping this farmer pretty up his fields, and we're gonna get this scourge out of his fields. And then you know what? We're gonna come back and we're gonna talk about, if that represents sin, what did you learn about this today? Well, I learned that you can't get too close or you might get a splinter. That's a good thing to know. I learned that every one of them leans a little bit and has a little bit of weakness that I can attack. So I'm going to look at the sin in my life and I'm going to see where its weakness is. I'm going to attack it right there. See? And I learned that all of them, if I keep whacking at it, I might not be very good with a mattock, but if I keep whacking at it, I'll tell you what, I can finally get it out by the roots and I can kill it. So I'm going to stay with it. I'm not going to give up. I'm going to root that sin out of my life. Is this silly? I don't think it's silly. I think it's profound because it takes the physical, the patterns and the real life, visceral, physical universe, and it suddenly makes it spiritually relevant, spiritually real. It makes what is normally considered, an academic discussion internalized and real. And I suggest that is a place that we can all work on. So as I conclude, thanks again for having me. This is just such a pleasure. I don't get to say these things very often. And so giving me this platform to just let it all hang out is really enjoyable. And again, I'm not suggesting that we start a cult. I am suggesting that we seek and look for ownership of the high ground in our culture, practically, viscerally. Wouldn't it be the coolest thing if when the world struggles with fertility, with nutrient deficiency, with sickness, with scarcity, with shocks, with drought, if the world said, man, those Christians got it figured out. Their fields are green when ours are brown. Their cows are fat and healthy when ours are sick and need vaccines. Their kids don't need their wisdom teeth pulled out, a la John's talk. Okay? I mean, wouldn't it be cool if the world looked at us as the repository of God's sustaining providence? That, I suggest, is a cornerstone of our credibility in the world. Our credibility. Wouldn't it be neat if on our houses we were the first ones in the community to put on a solarium, and when the neighbor comes over, the Nature Conservancy member, the Audubon Society, the environmentalist comes over, hey, what are you doing here, George? Hey, man, I'm building a solarium so we can grow mescaline mix and cabbages in the wintertime and get some passive solar so we don't have to use as much petroleum and we don't have to bring in any trucks from far away, from California, to feed us in the wintertime. And we can feed ourselves and we can compost our kitchen scraps. We'll have a couple of chickens, they'll eat the kitchen scraps, make eggs for us, and we won't have to worry about Putin invading Ukraine because we're going to have our own food anyway. We don't buy any fertilizer, and we patronize farmers that use compost instead of chemical fertilizers. They don't have to buy it either, and we're gonna make an abundant one. You get about to that point, and the neighbor says, "Whoa, I thought you said you were a Christian." Yeah, I am. I'm doing this because I have the privilege and honor of participating with my Savior in redeeming not just people, but creation to himself as an object lesson of redemption. Now you have a platform, you have an ear, and you have credibility with someone that we have not had credibility with for a long time. I suggest that this is a bridge that we can build in our society to regain the high moral ground in our discussions. God help us to do it. Thank you.